Danica Patrick joins us now. It is so good to have you on. I'm going to take you back a little bit. Back when I was at the Today Show a long time ago, I turned on my phone and there was a tweet from Danica complimenting me on one of my outfits. And I said, I seriously fainted reading this. Your impact as a role model, Danica, we talk a lot about what you meant for young women, but to women like myself, all ages, you are and were aspirational. How did you process that?
Mm. I mean, I think that when it comes along at first, it's happening at an age that is like, like the intro said, 23 years old racing Indy cars. So when you first sort of step onto the scene and inherent and not inherit like in a everyone gets it kind of way, but when you start being asked about being a role model, you feel like I'm so young, I'm supposed to be having those. And so, but it was always something that it was something to me that was a true honor, is a true honor. And I think that as time had gone, there were athletes that would say things like, I didn't ask for this, and they would not want to play that role. But I thought it was a really honorable, rare role to be able to have. And so I always felt like being a role model and being inspirational, it became increasingly more important to me, to the point where the last few years of my career, I remember feeling like this was a really rare role that I got to have on top of the rare role of being a race car driver, which is odd too. And I thought, I don't want to waste this platform. And then I went, you know what? It's time to move on. It's time to let go. And I can still do this in other ways, which is what I'm doing now, especially with the podcast.
Absolutely. Which is so cool. You mentioned the fact that you embrace being a role model. We know that there have been famous male athletes who said, look, I am not a role model. I'm a basketball player. That luxury wasn't afforded to someone like you because you were breaking barriers, because you were one of one. There weren't, 30 other women doing what you were doing at that time and are, even with your podcast. I was, of course, perusing the internet, and I saw on your Instagram this beautiful trip to Egypt that you posted about. And on its surface, it looks super fun. And then I started to read what you were saying in the post itself. And you talked about being around those ancient temples made you reflect on the importance of honoring your own inner temple. So there was this really cool picture. And then I started to read past it. And you said, stop looking for a religious structure or a person or home or a job or a city or a partner to make you feel better. It doesn't work. I've tried it. What were you feeling in the moment that you wrote those very powerful and I think very relatable words?
Thank you. Well, it was just what was on my mind. It had been on my mind for a lot of the trip as we went through this trip and went into these temples and looked at the history and the stories about what they did or what we think they were doing. It became something sort of like an inner knowing in me that it was like, man, you can't, it's like, let me use the example, like we can't treat each other at a higher level. We can't treat someone else at a higher level than what we treat ourselves. So that's why when you tend to see someone that, takes care of themselves and puts high quality food in their body and, works out and is caring and give like that to themselves, they tend to be able to do that for someone else. And so, so it's the inner temple, and the outside is just a reflection. Everything is just a reflection. The people that you come into interaction with, your relationships, especially. And so I think that we're all on that journey of inward. It's about the inner temple, and then it reflects on the outer world. I mean, I feel like another saying that comes to mind is, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. So
100%.
It just became really obvious to me, or felt rooted in me, that the inner temple really, really was the most important. You can't go to some structure or you can't go to someone and expect them to solve your problems. If that was the case, then the searching wouldn't take very long.
Is this a philosophy and a lifestyle that you started after racing, Danica? Because when people get to that moment, as Oprah famously called the aha moment, you wonder what happened, how you got there.
I feel like I keep having a lot of aha moments, but to answer your question, no, it's not new at all. And it's funny, I just didn't have really the time to cultivate it. And for anybody who is on a spiritual journey, which basically once it starts, it never ends. And in fact, it could be said that you're always on it. It's just a matter of where you're at on the sort of growth cycle. there's levels of it, and but it's also not always
Yeah.
pretty. And so sometimes we are sort of more in our ego and more in our mask and our sort of coping mechanism of dealing with
Mm-hmm.
work or whatever. I mean, like I've been saying the example lately of, say you don't really like your boss, right? So you're like, oh, I hate my boss, and then they walk in and they're like, and you're like, hey, good to see you, how you doing? Like, you can't
Yeah.
operate. That's a funky world to live in, right? Where we're not really being our true
Right.
self. So this sort of unmasking of our environment not reflecting our inner world takes time to
Right.
vet out, filter, and shift.
When we started this show, I would tell people it was about taking my mask off and allowing our
Mhm.
guests, people like yourself, to take off their masks so we could have a real
Mhm.
conversation, which is so important, the unmasking of who we are. This show is about being perfectly imperfect. And I think for women, especially high achieving women like yourself, women, any woman for that matter, we mask up. We mask up. Um, in relationships as well. And one of the things, I think you know this about me because I'm a fan, I don't believe in talking about past relationships. I look at the future because I got married at 48 years old, so I had a lot of past. But I'm happy about the future with my husband.
Good
You
for
talked
you.
about dating in the future. You said the next guy who wants to be in a relationship with me will have his work cut out for him. But hearing you, everything, what does she mean he's going to have his work cut? He's got a person, a partner who is self-reflective, who's looking at the inner, who's found her perfectly imperfect journey, and it is an awesome one. So how's he going to have
Mm.
his work cut out for him? Because you seem perfectly imperfect to me.
Uh, yeah, again, like as time goes on, you can kind of clean the words up. And I think really what I mean is that when you know what you don't want, you know what you do want. But there's also this meeting on the other side of going, once I have healed and I have processed and I have accepted the imperfections that exist within me, I now give permission for the other person to be imperfect. And I also don't see their flaws as much because it's like, say, like I always use this reference because it's mine. If someone's lazy, I judge that, right? Because I don't allow myself to be lazy. So now, if I can create a healthy dynamic within myself of maybe reframing it and doing it more, which is resting. Now, if someone's resting, it used to be called lazy, but I'm not triggered anymore. And so the person
Oh,
that's across from
wow.
me is not seen in such a judgmental light anymore, or because
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
judging myself. So, as you heal, you also are able to coexist with people in a much easier way.
I like that, and this plays in so well to, pretty intense, your podcast. I mean, it fits pretty because you are just that. You have an intensity that is welcoming because so often people think intense and they think a wall. It's so welcoming, and you talk to folks like Gloria Steinem, Matthew McConaughey, and others who I think would arguably be described as pretty intense as well. When you talk about how are you using these tools in relationship and in life, is there such a thing as a perfect person now in a relationship? As you look forward, is there the perfect one, or have you dispelled that as well?
Okay, so I think in a way, the perfect version becomes the untriggered version of yourself. Because once you aren't triggered
Ah.
anymore, other people seem more perfect, right? So it has to be you
I
first.
like that. Okay, listen, you are deep. You're taking me down rivers and valleys wasn't prepared for. This is exactly. I'm like, wait a minute, Danica, I'm on the racetrack, and what do they call it when the car, the car that's behind you, and what is it? I don't know racing terms. Your
You're
pace car.
following, or
That's
your
it.
pace car. Okay, I thought you were spinning out and crashing. I feel like we're winning the race right now.
Well, if I'm spinning out and crashing, it is because of one thing. In a good way, though. I'm celebrating what I have in my hand, the Danica Patrick Rosé. You have always had this, I guess, passion for it, but now this is your first foray into the rosé. Tell me about this journey.
Well, it's a long. So what I would say first though is if you're being triggered, just drink. It's also a solution, temporarily.
Danica.
Um, I
Well, here
do
we
that
go.
too because I'm a human and I am perfectly imperfect. But So I ended up buying a property in 2009 and starting from scratch with a vineyard and making wine, and eventually finally selling that label Somnium in 2017. So that was the impetus to what
Right.
ended up becoming Danica Rosé. And so there's nothing more that I hope that people,
It
so
smells beautiful.
this is the second wine.
Yeah.
So I hope that what
Mm.
people can always feel from me is that I'm authentic. Like, you might not like me, but at least I'm
Yeah.
honest, and at least you can feel that transparency and authenticity in me. And so in that same vein, there's nothing more authentic than making rosé in Provence, France.
Well, cheers to you. Thank you so much. And Danica's podcast, Pretty Intense, every Thursday. Check it out.